Well, hello there everybody, my name is Cameron and you've caught me at a rather inopportune moment. As you can see, I am being stalked by a humongous Tyrannosaurus Rex through what looks to be a rather otherworldly jungle environment. This is Little Orpheus. It comes to us from developer The Chinese Room, who were also behind games such as Dear Esther, Amnesia, A Machine for Pigs, and most recently Everybody's Gone to the Rapture. Three very distinct, very different and interesting games in my opinion, from what is generally a very distinct and interesting developer. Those games helped to spearhead what would become the walking simulator genre, which is a label I don't particularly enjoy, but it's become popular to the point where you can't really avoid it. This is obviously a fairly radical departure from the team's earlier work. It is a 2D puzzle platformer, much different tonally as well, much more tongue-in-cheek, set in the 1960s during the space race. You play as Soviet cosmonaut Ivan Ivanovich, who leads an expedition to the centre of the Earth in the hopes of finding out whether or not it is hospitable enough to be colonised ultimately. As soon as you arrive, you realise that you are not alone down there. There are all manner of ancient dinosaurs and perhaps even a fairly advanced civilization lurking below the surface. So the story cuts back and forth between present-day Siberia, where you're being interrogated by a Soviet general, and flashbacks here where Ivan is recounting his expedition and all the ups and downs, all the life-threatening encounters he endures throughout, including, as you saw earlier, a run-in with a Tyrannosaurus Rex, and later on some other fairly unsightly creatures. I have progressed past this point. I'm probably about an hour or so in. This is maybe within the first half hour or so. The game is structured quite interestingly. As I say, the story sort of jumps back and forth, and the levels themselves are split up into television episodes almost. It's sort of reminiscent of what Alan Wake did almost 10 years or so ago now, maybe even longer, goodness me. So yes, at the start of every new level you'll get a title sequence, and at the end there will be credits. It adds a fairly distinct personality, and it kind of makes it all feel like a fun cartoon almost, and I obviously mean that in the best way possible. And another thing that adds to the personality and makes it really rather charming is the sound design. So as you can see here, Ivan is hiding for dear life inside an egg. His little footsteps are reflected in plucks of the violin. Just little things like that. There's some really charming sound design going on here, and that's something that's carried over quite well from the team's earlier games. So Everybody's Gone to the Rapture had this really stunning soundscape and such a wonderful, distinct environment and sense of time and place, which this definitely does too. As I say, completely different in almost every way to their earlier games, but their strengths in terms of narrative, in terms of visual design, have all carried over quite successfully. In terms of gameplay, it is very, very straightforward, very simple. For some people it will be too basic, I fear. For me though, it just means that there aren't large barriers in the way of progression, so the pace is kept fairly brisk. So you'll go from puzzle sequences to stealth sequences to intense chases, all within 5-10 minutes sometimes. It feels like it's constantly moving, and I think that is more important than, oh, does it have X amount of really challenging puzzles that kept me stumped for however long. It's not going to be to everyone's liking due to that simplicity, but for me it totally works, and for the audience this is going for, I think it will work equally well. So yeah, I should also point out that this is an Apple Arcade exclusive, at least at launch on mobile. It is available now for download, and I don't believe there's any word on an Android release just yet, but you never know, perhaps. It would be a shame if it doesn't come to more platforms, because it has been a very pleasant time so far with a lot of cool stuff going for it. It will definitely appeal to fans of, I was going to say Inside or Limbo or generally like Playdead stuff, but the tone here is so completely different, pulling inspiration from Hollywood classics and sort of mid-century sci-fi writers, to the point where I don't know how much of an overlap there would actually be, but with the gameplay being as it is, I think if you were able to put up with Inside's relative simplicity, you will quite happily put up with this. Most of the puzzles so far have just been pushing crates around or mixing in brief moments of platforming, and even though it is fairly basic, it all functions just fine. I have been using a controller though. The touchscreen controls were, to me at least in the test flight build I've been playing, a touch off, just in terms of things like jumping from vines and some of the trickier platforming sections. They don't feel quite as tight as I would have liked, but as I say, I was playing a test flight version, so the day one version may well come with an update, I'm not entirely certain. Another little thing was that on my 7th gen iPad, I was getting a bit of lag here and there, a few frame rate drops, noticeable stuttering, but nothing that would really hurt the experience too greatly. And the presentation and level of charm on display here is so great that the slight technical blemishes didn't really affect my experience all too greatly. Again though, I am still fairly early on, probably an hour or so in, so these things could become a greater issue over time. Things could change quite drastically from here on out, but first impressions have been very, very strong. I would recommend giving this one a go if you're an Apple Arcade subscriber. This just continues their run of really solid games. So I think that will do it for today's video. I hope you've enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one.
I still struggle to believe it.